Next up, we've got Professor James Sharman from the Menzies Institute for Medical Research. So, James, if you'd like to share your screen and we can get started.
And thanks very much for this invitation. Hopefully we'll through now.
James, just struggling to hear you a little bit there.
Does it make any difference now, Dan?
Still quite quiet.
I guess all I can do is...
That's a bit better. So, yep.
I'll try and do my best to speak up as much as possible. I've got my microphone turned right up. So look, thanks very much. Just let me know if it becomes a problem. So how to measure blood pressure accurately is the topic that I've been asked to discuss today, which is extremely large when it comes to the number of different types of standardised measurement of blood pressure that occur. Firstly, we have the clinic where there's an observer, but also in the clinic without the observer, at home over several days by the patient with their own device, and the gold standard of 24-hour.
Hi, Jim. We're really struggling to hear you. Sorry. I'm not sure if the microphone's up as full as it can go, perhaps.
I'll try and plug in a headphone, Dean.
Yep, sure, no worries.
Does that make any difference?
Much better. Perfect.
Okay, apologies for that.
No worries.
So here we go again, and let's have a look. So moving right along. I think I wanted to start with this quote from Thomas Pickering back in 2005, highlighted already, I think, by Ulf's nice talk there about blood pressure is one of the most important measurements in all clinical medicine. They went on to say, but is still one of the most inaccurately performed. And that was said back in 2005. It's now 2020. And these comments still apply because there are so many sources of inaccurate blood pressure measurement. Throughout this talk, I've put a number of links together for people if they want to click on them to find the papers that I'm talking about. And I'm happy to provide this talk to anyone that may be interested to receive it. In terms of the sources of inaccuracy, this systematic review published in journal Hypertension a couple of years ago is terrific. It lists basically all the, well, some 27 sources of error in the measurement of blood pressure, and they range from issues related to the patient, the procedure itself, which can be, there are so many different sources of error, observer-related errors, hearing relating to auscultatory, now an older method, but the device itself moving from mercury to aneroid and now mainly oscillometric blood pressure devices. And one issue that I wanted to attend to today was about device validation, which is a critical issue that's hitting the world really of blood pressure and is a major ongoing problem we need to attend to. So just briefly, let's have a look at what happens if measurement is incorrect. Of course, it can lead to incorrect diagnosis. We get an underestimation of where we have an underestimation of the blood pressure. We may then give an erroneously normal signal. And of course, that means a diagnosis of high blood pressure is missed. There's false reassurance provided, and the opportunity to intervene to lower the blood pressure and lower the risk with lifestyle or medications is missed. And then, so the person remains at increased risk of cardiovascular events like stroke and heart attack and other vascular diseases. On the other hand, if we have an overestimation in the blood pressure, we get an erroneous elevation, a false diagnosis of high blood pressure, potentially unnecessary prescription, potential unnecessary side effects, and other things such as additional cost to individuals and the stigma of being labelled with, a problem that they don't actually have. And the impact of this at the population level, even with relatively small inaccuracies or moderate inaccuracies, has been shown very nicely in this paper by Norm Campbell, recently published in Journal of Clinical Hypertension, where you can see here that the population prevalence in this population from rural China, if measured accurately, is around about a third of the adults in the population, which is similar to what we know in other populations. If we have an error in the order of a 10 on 5 systolic and diastolic, the magnitude now we see the prevalence is up over 50%, which is significantly overestimating the population prevalence. And at the other end, if we underestimate the blood pressure through various different inaccuracies, you can see that you seriously underestimate the population level of prevalence. And this has major impact on the allocation of resources. So we can avoid these incorrect diagnoses by trained observers using standardized procedures and approved devices. So you could argue that approved devices falls under the standardized procedures, but it's something I think we need to attend to quite separately in this presentation. Firstly, if we look at the standardized procedures, I didn't want to take you through each one of these and just exhaustively go over the specific protocols for these different blood pressure measurement procedures. But what I have done is provided direct links to each of these, the guidelines on how to measure blood pressure, taking note that 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure is the gold standard. So if we have a quick look at where I've linked you up with, firstly, the Australian guidelines for the diagnosis and management of hypertension published in 2016, give a really detailed list here of exactly what to do for your clinic, measured blood pressure, exactly how to go about that. Likewise, for the unobserved automated blood pressure in the clinic, there are details within this guideline document. The Canadians have also gone to a great deal of effort within their guidelines and on their website to provide information on an automated unobserved clinic blood pressure. So there are good resources there for you to chase down. Home blood pressure monitoring is increasingly being recommended for use. The Australian consensus statement was published in 2015. This gives the rationale and the background as well as the step-by-step how to measure blood pressure. But as with so many guidelines, they're not always accessible by most people. We wanted to accompany some pragmatic resources with these home blood pressure guidelines. So we produced these for patients and doctors and published in Australian Family Practice here. There's a link, and that takes you to, downloadable, printable, one-page versions of how to measure home blood pressure, as well as paper diaries or an electronic diary if you want for patients to use. And more recently, we wrote this, so Marcus Schlake, myself and Mark Nelson wrote this conversation article, which effectively puts all of the latest information in and around home blood pressure monitoring in this conversation article with links on home blood pressure measurement. Now, it's entitled How to Measure Your Blood Pressure in Isolation, because it's of the current environment we're in with COVID-19, but effectively that's what isolation is, how you measure home blood pressure. So it was a nice fit for that article. The ambulatory blood pressure guidelines is a consensus position statement published in 2011. That's the latest version. It gives a full detail and rundown on how to standardize the assessment of 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure. So I would like to just spend the remaining time focusing on approved devices. We have the recommendations in pretty much all international guidelines that approved blood pressure devices must be used. But what are they? Well, this is a definition that a blood pressure device, approved blood pressure device, is one that has been independently validated for accuracy according to established scientific standards, and preferably with the results published in a peer-reviewed journal. By independently, I mean independent from the manufacturer, so we don't have that bias creeping in, and according to established scientific standards that have been published. And when we talk about a validation study, we're testing for accuracy. It's when we take a blood pressure device, say an automated oscillometric blood pressure device, and we compare it with the gold standard using a very rigorous and standardized protocol against mercury auscultation. So in doing that, what you do, you're testing the accuracy of the device, but unfortunately, there are many regulatory loopholes that enable manufacturers to market and sell non-validated blood pressure devices according to the criteria that I've just outlined to you here. And these devices that are non-validated are much more likely to be inaccurate. So we recently published, as part of the Lancet Commission on Hypertension group, a paper that summarizes the issues as well as the some recommended actions to try and address this issue. But I want to just set where the scene as to where we are worldwide. This is data from a UK database that looks at the validation status of blood pressure monitors. And as of yesterday, this data is basically been taken from. So 81.8% of blood pressure devices sold or available have no proven clinical accuracy. This is a summary of just a few of the top, in alphabetical order, some of the manufacturers. Pink is non-validated. So you can see here, this last one has 34 devices and not one single one of those have been validated according to those criteria that I mentioned to you before, and is likely to be more inaccurate. Altogether, Medival has assessed some 4,217 devices. These come from more than 450 manufacturers worldwide. And interesting to note, there are more than 40 manufacturers sell between 20 to more than 50 separate devices that have no proven clinical accuracy, which is quite remarkable when you think about it. There were only 8 manufacturers that I could find with 100% clinical accuracy for the devices they sell. This is because mostly they're just selling one device, and one of these manufacturers sold 2 devices. So that's a bit of a flyover of the state of play. We wanted to have a look at the situation in Australia, the number, the type, the cost, and the validity status of blood pressure devices available online. This was published in Hypertension with our today's chair, Dean, as the first author, and you can see by the headline there that the results, the primary results of this study, that we've got a lot of non-validated blood pressure devices available that people are purchasing. So this is a summary of this study, where overall there were 972 unique individual blood pressure devices available, of which 278 of these were the upper arm cuff devices. So these are the ones that are recommended for use in clinical practice, but only 18.3% of these had undergone, accuracy testing according to international validation standards. There are 162 separate wrist cuff devices, of which only 8% had undergone validation testing. And most concerningly, these wristband wearable devices, there are 532. Not one single one of these had undergone independent validation testing. So if we have a quick flyover of the different types of online retailers here, the biggest culprit in terms of non-validated devices were these e-commerce companies such as Amazon and eBay that we know very well, supplying more than 90% of the blood pressure devices into Australia, but from those devices only 5.5% were validated. So I think one of the biggest findings here is this endless volume, the supply to consumers of wristband devices purporting to measure blood pressure. This is something for us to keep an eye out. You can see here, you can buy these things for $8 to $60. They vary in all sorts of prices. But there's caution must be applied here, because we can purchase online globally, and including in Australia, blood pressure devices with no proven clinical accuracy. I didn't take you through the data, but they're cheaper than validated devices by about a quarter. And this means that consumers may be more directed towards these type of devices. They're less likely to be accurate. And we know that these devices that are non-validated make their way into home blood pressure monitoring for use. So how do you find out if the blood pressure you have or one that you're proposing to buy has been validated? Well, again, Dean is responsible for leading up this development of this resource on how to check that a blood pressure monitor has been properly tested for accuracy. This is available on the Menzies webpage. It's also a link to that webpage from the HBPRCA website. The material within this has been endorsed by the HBPRCA as well as the World Hypertension League and the Stroke Foundation. So please use it and send it on to anyone who you think might need this resource. So to summarize my last slide here, you know, accurate blood pressure measurements critical for correct diagnosis and appropriate clinical care. We can avoid incorrect diagnosis by trained observers using these standardized protocols very correctly and using approved devices. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks very much, James. Fantastic presentation. So I'd like to open the floor to any questions. Like before, please feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. Perhaps in the meantime, I'll get started. I guess, James, what do you think might be the in the short term, sort of some of the things that we can do to get started to try and improve the situation around validated devices, so that we can get less prevalence of these non-validated devices in the market?
Yeah, there's so many things that need to be done. I think education is a very big factor, and this is something that, you know, part of the reason why we're presenting it here today, and we're going to a lot of effort to publish papers to connect with end users and organisations to raise awareness is critically important. We need to connect with a whole lot of different players involved in the industry, including industry themselves, those organisations that purchase devices on behalf of health facilities, and this is actually a worldwide issue. We're working actively around the globe as much as we can with the available resources that we've got, as well as here in Australia. I think what we'd like to see is to have confidence in going to, you know, a particular organisation or a particular place and know with 100% assurance that all of their devices have been appropriately tested, such as pharmacies, for instance. And at the moment, that's not the case for pharmacies in Australia, but we want to take up more conversation with Australia's Pharmacy Society and change that situation. They're very positive about that so far. Lots of things to do.
So we've got a few more questions. So I'll first start with one that Alta popped in the chat, which is it possible to validate cuffless wrist BP devices with current techniques? Is that the bottleneck?
It is possible to validate. It's and again, it is according. It depends what people want to compare their device to. If they're purporting to measure or be equivalent to conventional upper arm cuff blood pressure, then absolutely you can use the standard protocol that's available and widely accepted, and that's no problem at all. If you're talking about the wristband wearable devices and continuous monitoring, cuffless monitoring, that's a different situation, and it is a potential source of a bottleneck, Alta. There is a standard from the IEEE that can be used, a procedure, but I think that they're also working on development of improving that, on the understanding that more technology is coming out purporting to measure blood pressure wherever there's a palpable artery, wherever there's a site of potential blood pressure measurement. And there's lots of potential in this area that's very exciting. It's just that we've got to make sure we don't move ahead of that evidence and start just measuring something. You know, you can measure blood pressure, but we really want to make sure it's accurate. So there's a little bit more work to be done in and around that.
Okay, thanks. We'll try and get through a couple more quickly. So Anastasia and then Yugesh.
Hi, Jim. It's great to get different engagement. I think a key factor would be industry. As you know, we've been trying. I just want to say that there is a positive move because Philips, I can say Philips, sent a note to our medical engineers to check the validation of the two algorithms. So the message is getting out there. What would you like to see? How do you see us as a society of hypertension specialists getting industry to adopt more of that?
Thanks, Anastasia. Yeah, really great points. And I think it's really, again, about just open communication, understanding they are key end users of this whole cycle, life cycle of the use of blood pressure monitors. So we need to engage with them and other key end users. So it's a matter about having a conversation. The HBPRCA is in I think, an ideal position with so many experts in blood pressure and blood pressure monitoring. And if they can go to the HBPRCA as a source of expertise and knowledge and understanding, that they'll get a fair hearing, and that we can work together to ensure that each other's concerns, if you like, are met. So I think it's about there's not enough communication at the moment with industry, and this is something we're trying to open up. So it's a very good point. Thanks, Anastasia.
Okay, we might just do one more quick. Geesh, did you have a question? Your hand was raised.
Yeah, thanks, Dean.
Yep.
Thanks, James. That was really interesting, and I got a vested interest because both my parents have hypertension, and I advise them to do a 7-day blood pressure recording with the hypertension medication. So I will make sure I check your website to see if the device is approved or not. Just to kind of take it a little bit further, in your expert opinion, what is the best time for patients that take antihypertensive medications to measure their blood pressure at home? Is it in the night, or is it before medication, after medication?
Yeah. So those, again, it's in a very standardized process. The conversation article, I think, probably gives you the most amount of information. I would recommend your mum and dad go to that one. And it's before medication, at the same time in the morning and the evening, but it's also before exercise, before food, making sure that they're not cold and they're comfortable and not stressed, and all these standardized, all these biases that we know creep in, making sure we've got a standardized approach. So, the more that people understand that, the better off we'll be. We've got a major education issue here. I think, the people measure their blood pressure at home thinking, well, I'm at home, I can measure it under any conditions. Standing up, having an argument with the children, making dinner, no, it doesn't work like that. It needs to be standardized. So I hope those resources assist your parents. They've helped my father. I'm also got a bias there as well, because he has high blood pressure that we have to deal with.
Thank you, Jim.
That's great. Thanks very much, James, for a fantastic presentation.